What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Is it time to give D-backs owner Ken Kendrick some respect for being one of the premier spending owners in Major League Baseball?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to be discussing Ken Kendrick. Is he a premier spending owner in Major League Baseball? The path to the D-backs bouncing back in 2025. And we'll take a look at some popular names who are on the trade market right now and discuss if the D-backs should go after those players this offseason. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss Ken Kendrick and if he's one of the premier spending owners in Major League Baseball, because I actually want to frame this conversation through the prism, through the lens of, is there a chasm between big markets versus small markets? Does Major League Baseball actually have a problem with the amount that big markets spend, the resources that they have to spend on free agents versus small markets and the competitive advantage that big markets might have? That's really what I want to explore and then tie in Ken Kendrick and how he's one of the best spending owners into this conversation as well, because you look at free agency this year and the last few years and it feels like it's dominated by the big market teams when it comes to those star players, right? The Juan Sotos, the Aaron Judges, the Otanis, the Max Frieds, now the Garrett Coles, like feels like those guys are staying pretty coastal, right? LA's, the New Yorks, the San Frans, maybe the San Diegos, but it feels like you're going to either be in Cali, New York, or some kind of major market because those teams have the most money. The Dodgers, the Yankees, like those teams make the most revenue. So it's not shocking to see those teams are going to have the most money to spend on free agents. But does baseball have a problem with that? Is there too much of a divide with how much those big markets can spend on players versus how much small markets can spend? Because as we're seeing, it feels like only big markets are acquiring these star players while small markets are sitting on their hands. And for me, I think there is a problem between what we're seeing big markets do versus small markets, but I don't really put the blame on the big markets. I have, you know, I definitely am pushing back against the deferral stuff when it comes to the Dodgers. But again, the Dodgers just took advantage of a system and the loophole in a legal way, though, right? They just found a way to maximize the deferral system. And now I think Major League Baseball needs to input rules to hopefully adjust some of those things. But for the most part, I like how the Dodgers stay aggressive. I like all these big market teams staying aggressive. And for me, I want more small market teams to be aggressive like these big market teams. Now, maybe they can't offer $765 million like the New York Mets did to Juan Soto, but that doesn't mean these small market teams can't put more into their on-field product. And yes, big market teams make more money so they can spend more money. That's definitely a thing. Some people want the salary cap. I don't think we need that. I definitely think, there's just going to be players that small market teams are not maybe as accessible to, or if they are accessible to, you probably can't get as many other star players just because of the nature of the contracts. But that doesn't mean these small markets can't spend more on the ball club they have. Maybe they can't spend like the Dodgers or Yankees, but you know what team is spending relative to the Dodgers and Yankees? The Arizona Diamondbacks. This is where we tie it back into Ken Kendrick, because The score does this thing called the Scrooge Index, which basically just tells you how much money does your team make in revenue, and then how much money from that revenue do they put back into their team. And for teams like the Dodgers, they make the most revenue in the second most revenue in Major League Baseball, 637 million in 2024. Well, guess what? The Dodgers also have the second highest Scrooge index, which means 67% of that $637 million revenue goes back into their payroll of 428 million. So yes, Dodgers have more money to spend on their free agents, more than any other team, or except the Yankees, because they're super popular. And so, yes, it's unfair that the Dodgers have so much more money than other teams, but they at least use that money and put it back onto the field. Maybe that's the problem that other teams have, is that they have so much money that they actually spend the money. But there's other teams that could at least be comparable to the Dodgers in terms of what they're pulling in and then putting it back out there on the field. Because you look at the Dbacks, they are number 3 on the Scrooge Index list. The Mets are number 1. 102% of the Mets' revenue is going to their payroll. They're actually in a deficit. They're spending more than they're making. But the Dodgers are number 2 at 67%. Then the Dbacks are number 3 at 66%. Their revenue is half of the Dodgers, 331 million. But they're putting 219 of it back into the field, which is 66% of their revenue. So yes, Dodgers double the D-backs in revenue and also double the D-backs in payroll. But both teams are putting 2/3 of whatever they're making back onto their on-field product. And that's why you have this D-backs team, which is basically like the clearance version of what the Dodgers are, right? The D-backs on paper, talent-wise, don't match up with the Dodgers. But you put the D-backs in the series against the Dodgers like we saw in the postseason, they can match up pitcher for pitcher, batter for batter, because they find guys from a production standpoint that may not have the star power, but can give you 90, 80% of what a lot of those Dodgers players can do for you. And that's what I think a lot more of these teams have to do. Maybe you're not pulling in 600-700 million like the Dodgers or Yankees, so you can't put 400 back into your team. But the D-backs showed you if you make 300 million, you could put 2/3 of it back into your team. Maybe it won't lead to the postseason like we saw in 2024, but you can at least win 89 games and lead the league in runs scored. And that's what we need to see more from owners. Just spend more on your team. You look at the list and on the Scrooge end, you look at the list on the Scrooge Index, and basically it's split in half. Half the teams in Major League Baseball put at least 50% of their revenue back into the on-field product. Meanwhile, half of it don't. The A's, the Rays, guess what? The Rays made 280 million. The D-backs made 330. Okay. The D-backs made 50 million more than the Rays, but it wasn't an insane amount. But guess what? The Rays only put 32%, dead last, $89 million payroll. That's disgusting. The Boston Red Sox, you know where they are in revenue? The Red Sox are, let me pull it up again. The Red Sox, I don't know why revenue all of a sudden is not, here we go. The Red Sox in revenue, number 3. But you know where they are in the Scrooge Index ranking? In the second half, the Red Sox only put 40% of their revenue back into the on-field product. That's the problem with baseball. Teams like the Red Sox, team like the Rays, who pull in hundreds of millions of dollars and then put 40 to 30% of that back into their on-field product, that is the problem. You should not be an owner in sports if you don't put at least 50% of your revenue back into your payroll. That's what I believe. Yes, there's definitely a chasm between big markets and small markets, but I think small markets can close the gap a little bit by spending relative to what big markets spend with their payroll. Now I want to discuss the path to the D-backs bouncing back in 2025 in segment number 2. And if you're looking to place a little wager, then of course, the best place to do that is going to be FanDuel, because get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. When I see the Phoenix Suns are playing, give me Devin Booker over on points. Give me KD over on points when he's playing, of course. And give me the Suns money line. That 3-leg hits. It brings a big smile to my face. If you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com. You'll get started with the $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss, according to Mike Hazen, the D-backs' path to bouncing back in 2025. And really, I don't even know if it's a bounce back because any other year, you're the third wild card with 89 wins, or excuse me, any other year, you're any team with 89 wins and you lead the league in runs scored, you're more than likely 99% guaranteed a wild card spot. Such a weird year where the D-backs have this fantastic regular season and don't make the playoffs. Like, how do we have an extra wild card spot, 2 extra wild card, 3 extra wild card spots? The D-backs still don't make it to the postseason. Frustrating to see, but Mike Hazen has been discussing the path for the D-backs to bounce back, the way the D-backs can get back to the postseason in 2025, because he's very open in discussing it's not going to be the way that we saw in 2024, where the offense was incredible. We got a lot of home runs. We had some legit power in our bats. Hazen is already confessing, don't expect the same D-backs in 2025. We're going to have to win games a different way next year, and I'm okay with that. The way that Mike Hazen laid out and described, I think is definitely plausible because he discussed run prevention as the key to the D-backs winning games next season. And I definitely believe that is the best way for the D-backs to win games. I think it's small ball offense, elite defense, and you're pitching bouncing back in a major way. I look at the lineup right now. I don't love it. I think the lineup is still good, but if you were able to add a Goldie or a Carlos Santana at first base and then add another DH, maybe bring back Grichuk or someone along those lines with the lineup you already have, I feel good about it. Now, defensively, it has to take a little bit of a step back if you're swapping in Pavin Smith for Christian Walker at times throughout the season. Like, the defense just won't be as good. But Ketel Marte, Gold Glove finalist this past year. Geraldo Perdomo, wizard with the glove. Eugenio Suarez, a really strong defensive third baseman. You could bring in Jordan Lawler, potentially off the bench, who looks like he has a really sweet glove. Jake McCarthy had a very nice season in center field last year. Corbin Carroll's the speedster. Lourdes Gurriel, very underrated defender. You look at the metrics, they love Lourdes Gurriel out in left field. Should still have Alek Thomas off the bench. Like, for the most part, outside of first base, now feels like the biggest weakness for the D-backs defensively, which is insane because we just came off this run where the D-backs had the best defender at first base every single year, the last 3. And now the D-backs, I mean, there's a world where we might have the worst defense at first base next year, depending on how many games Pavin Smith is expected to play at first. But absolutely insane if that ends up being the scenario. Still praying Christian Walker comes back, but does not feel like it's going to happen. But outside of first, defensively, the D-backs can still be good, still be solid, still be fundamentally sound. And so when we talk about run prevention, for the most part, I still feel good about the defense. Blaze shouldn't be starting at shortstop. Hopefully, if Perdomo is healthy, the rest of the defenders around the diamond are pretty solid. Gabriel Moreno can have a little bit of a bounce back defensively too, because I think he took a little bit of a step back last year coming off the first season he had with Arizona where he was dynamite. Then the pitchers, that's really the area we're discussing when talking about run prevention, because Zach Gallen at his best, Cy Young pitcher. If you get that Zach Gallen, which I believe you will get, that's a upper 2, mid 2, low 3 guy. Merrill Kelly, remember, he was dominant through his first few starts last year before getting hurt. I think he's going to be dominant once again. You get him healthy for a full season, that's a low 3 ERA guy. Brandon Pfaadt, he takes another little leap forward. Maybe still not as good as we want him to be, but if he could be like a 3.8, 3.9 guy next year, maybe with what we saw from Ryan Nelson, maybe that's real. I don't know how much he'll be pitching in the rotation. It really depends on if we trade Monty and Erod, because as it stands right now, both of those guys are coming back. Erod feels like a lock to come back. Monty feels 50-50. D-backs are definitely trying to trade him. But if he does come back, I still like the idea of Monty having a bounce back for the D-backs next season. I still think he can be good. I still think Erod can be good. Like, those are really the big question marks and X factors in this D-backs rotation and for the D-backs chances of getting back to the postseason in 2025. How good can Monty be next year? How good can Erod be next year? Monty 6.23 ERA. Erod 5.04 ERA. If you guys can get back to just your career average, your career norms, this D-backs team would be so good next year. Offensively should still be at least middle of the pack, if not top 5 in the National League. But the pitching has the kind of variance where it could be one of the best in the NL or it could be, mediocre once again if the Erods and the Monties don't hit. And then if you add a reliever or two in the back end of your bullpen, maybe one with closing experience, hopefully one that's high leverage, high velocity. Like, if you do that with what you have in the Pucks, what you have in the J Marts from what you saw last year, Ginkgo a little bounce back, Ryan Thompson, Joe Mantiply was good last year. Maybe Dre Jameson is back in cooking. Maybe Gilbert Diaz takes a step forward. Like, I think run prevention is definitely the path for the D-backs to being competitive in 2025. The lineup is going to take a step back, sadly, with Christian Walker, Jock, and Grichuk gone. But that doesn't mean guys like Moreno, Perdomo, Jake McCarthy, Corbin Carroll, like all those guys could be better offensively. And the D-backs are still going to go out there and at least add a bat or two this offseason. Then the pitching is really the area where we're looking at that needs to bounce back. First of all, get your health right. You get a full season of Gallen, Kelly, Erod, and Monty. That's number one. You get that. You just get health out the way. That's a major game changer. Number two, now you get those guys at least looking like their career norms, their career averages. Now all of a sudden you have yourself an elite rotation, elite pitching staff, add a reliever to this offseason, and this D-backs pitching staff and offense would definitely be good enough to get back to the postseason in 2025. Now I want to discuss some of the hottest names on the trade market right now, if the D-backs should go after them this offseason, in segment number 3. And if you're looking to buy tickets, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Time, because Game Time is the best place for last-minute tickets on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. My favorite thing about Game Time is this little feature called All-In Pricing. When you toggle that feature on, you can see the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can even get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what you're purchasing. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account or redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss some of these trade targets that I want the D-backs to go after. And one target that was actually picked up like that final day of winter meetings that I think would have been really interesting as a candidate for the D-backs, who I mentioned briefly on the podcast before, Jake Burger, picked up by the Texas Rangers, first baseman, third baseman too, just sneaky good. Career numbers, 789 OPS. He's been like a 30, he's averaged 32 home runs the last 2 years, around 80 RBIs, and that's for the Marlins and the White Sox. Like, he's a 30 home run, 80 RBI, 800 OPS guy for the Marlins and the White Sox. You put this guy in Arizona, he could have been the next Christian Walker, potentially, just from a numbers, offensive production standpoint. Because if he was doing that in those terrible situations, imagine if you put him in the best offense in the National League. So great pickup by the Texas Rangers. Such a sneaky move. I really wanted the D-backs to be in on Jake Burger. I did not hear his name floated out a lot in terms of rumors or as like a potential candidate that was like available, but I was like, it's the Marlins. Everyone is available over there. So I wish the D-backs were able to pull off this move. But maybe you guys want the D-backs to pull off one of these other moves, because one guy that just allegedly became available who is really young and really good, and I don't understand why this team would trade him, Jared Jones allegedly is available by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I don't understand why they would do that at all. I get they have Paul Skeens, but Jared Jones is 23 years old, and he had a very good first season with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He started to struggle a little bit in the second half of the season where he hit a little bit of a rookie wall, but first half numbers, 3.56 ERA, his first 16 starts, 9.7 strikeouts per nine, averages 97 on the fastball. This is a guy as well who won't be a free agent until 2030 at the earliest. So a guy who's 23, nasty stuff, high velocity arm, and already proved that he's a pretty good pitcher in a bad situation. Like, why is this guy available? I'm not sure if I even believe it. According to MLB.com, it sounds like Jared Jones is very available. I just don't know why the Pirates would want to trade him. The Pirates are in a position where they need as much talent as they could get, and this guy's controllable for like the next 5 years. I just don't understand why you would move a guy 23 years old who's good, strikeout artist, who you don't have to pay for the next half decade. Like, it would make no sense to me if the Pirates moved him. I could see a Mitch Keller getting moved. Like, that makes sense. 28 years old, yeah, like 77 million left on his deal. Like, I could see him getting moved, but Jared Jones at 23, like, if he is truly available, like, yeah, go get us Jared Jones D-backs, because like we discussed with Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly both being pending free agents after 2025, I could see Kelly coming back. Zach Gallen's probably going to be way too expensive. Jared Jones, controllable for the next few years, the perfect kind of guy to have in your rotation if a Gallen leaves. Next up, how about potential first base option? Josh Naylor from the Cleveland Guardians. That's a team that just feels like they like to trade players as soon as their value is their highest. Whenever they have a player who's young and good and peaking, that's when it's time to trade them, right? Andres Jimenez, maybe Josh Naylor next. Obviously, they never traded Jose Ramirez, but Naylor sneakily very good. Defensively might be some question marks, but 30 home runs, 100 RBIs this past year, 776 OPS. Like, the last 3 years, he's has decent power numbers, around 20 home runs, big RBI totals. The slug is pretty good. The strikeout numbers aren't terrible either. Like, I'll double check the strikeout numbers right now in terms of like the total strikeouts of what I see. Not bad. And so, like, I would definitely take a Josh Naylor on my team. Career strikeout rate of only 16.6%. Like, that's not bad at all. Josh Naylor is a very solid player. Doesn't strike out as much as Christian Walker. Maybe has as much pop in his bat. Defensively, probably not the same level of guy. But considering our options on the first base market, you could go get old man Paul Goldschmidt, who's going to be 38. You could get old man Carlos Santana, who's like 38, 39 years old. Like, the first baseman market right now is not that strong if you're not getting Christian Walker or Pete Alonso. You want to bring back Josh Bell? Like, I don't know if you feel good about that. Josh Naylor is at least only 27 years of age, coming off a stellar season where he was an all-star for the Cleveland Guardians. I also don't think he's going to be that expensive, going to be a free agent in 2026. So only one more season, and then you decide if you want to pay Josh Naylor or not. And if you do decide to pay him, I don't think he's going to get the 25 million a year that Christian Walker is about to get. Maybe he gets like 17 to 18. Not too sure just yet what his market value is going to be. But I think Josh Naylor, perfect kind of candidate. He is a lefty bat too, which I think is a little bit enticing. You lose Jock Peterson as a power lefty, and you need a first baseman. Josh Naylor could kind of fit both of those things that the D-backs are missing out on right now. So Naylor definitely high on my list of free agent targets, or at least trade targets that I want the D-backs to go after this free agency. And then the final guy I want to discuss, who I think is interesting, whose name has been floated around a ton, but I'm not sure if I want the D-backs to really go after him, is Alec Bohm. Bohm plays for the Philadelphia Phillies, mostly plays third, but also listed as a first baseman here. He did play 15 games at first this past year, 80 games at first in 2023, so definitely has a ton of experience at first base. And so when talking about the D-backs missing Christian Walker, like, Bohm is definitely an option. 15 to 20 home runs the last 2 years, almost 100 RBIs, really a doubles machine, solid average, solid just slash line across the board. Nothing that truly wows you. Probably hits into too many double plays as well, but Bohm is a good major leaguer. He's a good player. If the D-backs added him and you saw him every day, probably be like akin to how we feel about Lourdes Gurriel, where it's like Gurriel has weeks where he looks like an MVP. He has weeks where he goes absolutely cold and does nothing. But for the most part, we feel like Lourdes Gurriel is good. And when he's right, he's a very impactful player. And I feel the same about Alec Bohm. There's probably stretches where he looks fantastic, stretches where he's like, oh man, can this guy get a hit right now? But for the most part, he's an above average major leaguer. He's a good player. He's not a superstar. There's going to be times where you're frustrated with Alec Bohm. I mean, you just look at his month by month splits. In May, 648 OPS. June, 812. July, 807. August, 688. September, October, 502. Like, he's a guy that's going to have some volatility, a guy that's going to be up and down at times. But when he's smashing those monster doubles, when he's playing solid defense at first and third and getting these clutch hits, that's when you're really going to value an Alec Bohm. The biggest question is, what will it take to acquire him? Because it sounds like the Phillies are asking for a lot, and I don't think he's a player where you have to give up a lot for him. Jared Jones, I will give up a lot for Jared Jones because he's young, he's controllable. Josh Naylor, I probably wouldn't give up a lot for him, and I don't think you have to give up a lot for Josh Naylor. But Bohm, the Phillies are asking for a ton. I would not give up a ton. Yeah, I would give up a couple of top 30 guys, but you're asking for top 5 prospects, top 10 prospects, like not getting the Lawlers, you're not getting the Drew Jones, you're not getting anyone who I think is pretty elite and can make a real impact on the major league level. So you can have some of our middling prospects, but if you want someone elite, I'm probably passing on Alec Bohm. Now leave in the comment section which of those trade targets you think you would be interested in seeing the Arizona Diamondbacks acquire this offseason. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.